Hi, people. I am back. So that was the first time I've ever been to Motutapu Island. Who else has been there? Yes. So, and then this week I'm up here teaching Kiri Baptist block course. I'm at Pulse here on Wednesday night. I've got a World Vision Board meeting as well this week. So we thought it'd be nice to, while I'm up here, I might as well come and yet again be with you good people. So, hi. I would like to speak from one of Paul's letters. Now, Paul didn't set out to be a writer, but he did have to send off kind of emergency emails, urgent messages to various Christians and churches. And it's fascinating. I don't know about you and your email relationship, but sometimes you're doing an email and you do it with a certain emotion, yes? And then another time you do an email with a different type of emotion, yes? Is that right? So it's the same with Paul here, actually. If you look at his kind of urgent message to, let's say, the people in Galatia, it was with anger. That was his emotion. But if you look at another letter that he did, like to the Christians in Philippi, it was with joy. The one that I want to read out this morning, he's writing with deep sorrow. Okay? So I don't know if you have your Bibles, but come with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And let me just read out a passage and then we'll jump into this. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1. And Paul writes this. He says, Paul, an apostle of King Jesus, through God's will, and Timothy, our brother, to God's assembly in Corinth, with all God's people in the whole of Achaia, grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord King Jesus. Let us bless God, the Father of our Lord, King Jesus. He is the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all our trouble, so that we can then comfort people in every kind of trouble, through the comfort with which God comforts us. Just as we have an overflowing share of the Messiah's sufferings, you see, so we have an overflowing share in comfort through the Messiah. If we are troubled, it is because of your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it's because of your comfort, which comes about as you bear patiently with the same sufferings that we are going through. And our hope about you remains firm, because we know that just as you shared in our suffering, so you will also share in our comfort. You see, my dear family, we don't want to keep you in the dark about the suffering we went through in Asia. The load we had to carry was far too heavy for us. It's interesting. I only noticed that this morning, that there's that other verse where it says, He will not give you more than what you can bear. Now that has to be held in tension with this. That sometimes we are given things that are way too heavy for us. Isn't that interesting? The load we had to carry was far too heavy for us. It got to the point where we gave up on life itself. Yes, deep inside ourselves, we received the death sentence. This was to stop us relying on ourselves and to make us rely on the God who raises the dead. He rescued us from such a great and deadly peril, and He'll do it again. We have placed our hope in Him that He'll do it again. Okay, friends. About 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, I had an annual. Who else here has annuals? Or is it just us old people? So I had an annual. And I went to my doctor, and she's a she. First time I've had a female doctor. So I went to my doctor and I said, I need to have an annual. And so, she arranges for the bloods to be done. And there's the height, the weight, and then she grabbed her stethoscope. And she grabbed her stethoscope, and I was seated in a chair, And she was standing, and so she came to my side, and then she put her hand with the stethoscope to my heart. And as she did so, she sort of exclaimed, "Oh my goodness." And I said, "What?" And she said, "You have an ugly lesion on the back of your neck." And she said, "You're coming in tomorrow, I'm rearranging my schedule, and we're having a minor operation." And so, fortunately, I didn't have a shirt on. She would never have seen it because it was melanoma. Anyone else here, melanoma? Oh yeah, I'm in a minority again. And so, next day in, cut it out. It was sent away for testing. Bad news, it was serious. Good news, they got it all. But it was kind of like a random event for me, and it seemed like, and she sort of suggested this, "You've just dodged a bullet." You know that phrase? To dodge a bullet, something serious could have happened, and it didn't. But then that's not always the case, is it? You may have heard this story, and this also happened very, very recently here in Auckland. So a good friend of ours, she was married many years ago, and her marriage, like some, it just didn't survive after about 8 years of marriage or thereabouts. And so they broke up, and she took the girls. Do you know who I'm talking about? She took the girls. And I think she lived her life as a single person for about another 8 to 10 years. And then she fell in love again. And she met this person from the UK, and then they decided to get married. He had 2 sons from a previous marriage. And so just a few weeks ago, several weeks ago, they got married. And I saw the photos, brilliant, just lovely, gorgeous. And then 2 weeks after the wedding, he was killed in a car crash. Both Christians, but he was killed. Remember that week here in New Zealand? And I think it was about 26 people died in that 1 week. And he was driving from the airport and around that roundabout and slid off, and his car flipped and head down into a swamp. Got to hospital, just barely alive, but didn't survive the night. So she was married with him for 2 weeks. I don't know about you, dear friends, but life seems very cruel. I mean, at times life seems very unfair. It's almost like, sooner or later, all of us here, sooner or later, we lose someone or something very important. Now, the Bible has a word for that, and it was mentioned before, and the word was troubles. Or another word is the word affliction. And of course, affliction has 1,000 different faces to it. I mean, I could mention, for example, it could be a miscarriage that devastates a woman and a couple. It could be that, there are some couples who are desperately trying to have a child, but for some reason the infertility rates in New Zealand are spiking right now, and they can't. And again, that just crushes them. It could be that there is someone single here this morning, and you would love to find a suitable partner, but for whatever reason, that person is not surfacing for you. It could be the death of a pet, in all seriousness, because for some people, their pet is like a family member. And when they lose their pet, it's devastating for them. I mean, affliction comes in 1,000 different ways. And for Paul, the passage that I read, did you see what it was for him? He was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The scholarship around 2 Corinthians chapter 1 is that Paul was either having a nervous breakdown or was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And here he was saying to brothers and sisters, hey, look, there's something I need to tell you, and I don't want to keep it in the dark. I'm on the verge of a nervous breakdown if I haven't already had it. Because when he says the sentence of death within me, he was coming to his wit's end. He had had enough. And he was in some form of breakdown. And he shared it with people. So, in the last 5 years, what kind of affliction or afflictions have you had? I'd like you to share that with the person next to you. But if you put your head heavenward towards the ceiling, that is a signal to the people around you, you don't want to talk. Okay? And in all seriousness, I want to respect that. So, but could you turn to the people around you? What are some of the afflictions that you've had, be they ever so small or ever so big, wide, deep, whatever, in the last 5 years? Go to it. Okay, friends. I mean, I don't know about you this morning, but it seems to me that sooner or later, a cell phone goes off. Bless you, sister. But it does seem to me, sooner or later, I don't know about you, but we discover that this world is not a nice place. And it's not full of just nice people and nice experiences. It seems to me that this world at times is very unsafe. I mean, sooner or later, each one of us is going to get knocked down by something. Something will come our way that we do not welcome or invite. And it has the power and the potential to just devastate us. I mean, it was about, 4 years ago. I can't remember when I first started this speaking here at Green Lane. But the first message that I gave was me telling you about a 25-year period in my life where one thing after another just went wrong, just kept falling over. One disaster, disappointment after another. And I don't know, but it seems like sometimes in life we get all of these knocks and you get one and then suddenly you have to brace yourself for the next knock that's going to come your way. It's like there are so many events in the world in which we live that are just seemingly out of control. I don't know about you, but sometimes the only way I can explain this, and it's a well-known line, but it's like life is like an accident waiting to happen. Now, are you sympathetic to that view? That life is like an accident waiting to happen. How many here are sympathetic to that? Have a chat with people around you about what I've just said. Go to it. No? Okay, friends, here we go. The person that I gleaned that line from was a guy by the name of Jerry Sitzer. So he shared that line in arguably the best book on suffering and disappointment that I've ever read. How many here have read Jerry Sitzer? No readers this morning. He wrote 2 very good books. I would strongly recommend them. They're small, they're doable, they're viewable, just little books. And one is called A Grace Disguised, brilliant title. And the other one is A Grace Revealed. And he wrote those 2 books after the story that I'm about to tell you. So Jerry married Linda, and for 11 years, she was infertile. They couldn't have children. And then they managed to have children. I don't know how that occurred, but they managed to surpass their infertility. Managed to have children, and they ended up with 4 kids. And they were homeschooling their kids. And then there came the time when 2 of their kids were doing a social studies project, and the social studies project was in and around Native American Indians. So Mum and Dad decided that they would take their kids to a Native Indian reservation. This is in America. Take their kids to a reservation so that they could get that hands-on learning through sight and sound and voice and speaking and so on. So they bundled everyone into the minivan. The 4 kids, Jerry's mother was staying at the time. She climbed into the van. Linda, Mum, and Jerry all got into the van, and they drove to the Indian reservation. They got there, and then they had a meal with the tribal leaders, and the kids were, asking all their questions. And then they got invited to go to the gymnasium, where there was a kind of a powwow, an Indian kind of circle, and some dancing. And they did all of that, and they were learning heaps. But by the time it got to about 8:30, the kids were getting tired. And so they said to Mum and Dad, could we go home now? And for sure, they all jumped, climbed back into the minivan, and they were 10 minutes into their trip. And Jerry, who was driving, he could see a slight corner in the road up ahead, and he could see the headlights of another car that was coming the other way. So Jerry started to slow down his car and pulled his car to the side of the curve. Pulled his car to the side of the curve, and but the other car, which was traveling way too fast, jumped the lane and smacked right into Jerry's car. And of course, it was mayhem and madness. It was a wreck. And when Jerry finally came to his absolute horror, he saw that his mother, Grace, was dead. He saw that his wife, Linda, was dead. And he saw that his daughter, Diana Jane, that she was also dead. And he described that time as like he had been run over by a torrent of pain. And he said each loss was like an amputation in his life. This is a Christian family. And it was Jerry Sitzer who penned that line, and he had every right and qualification to do so. That life is like an accident waiting to happen. And as I read on in these 2 fabulous books, he gives advice that's not one-liner, not cliche, but profound. And one bit of advice that really struck me was he said that when tragedy occurs, it's like something happens to us. But if we're not careful, something will then happen in us. So he said, you can experience a car crash, you can experience cancer, you can experience abandonment by someone, and that is something that happens to us. But as a result of that, if we're not careful, certain negative emotions, understandable be they may, can well up inside of us like despair, like bitterness, like anger, and like depression. And it's those things that if they overwhelm our lives and colour the outlook on our lives, they can cause the second death. And the second death is the death of your spirit. And you end up, not only that happening to you, but you end up with a damaged soul. And that is a real tragedy, surely. You know, it reminds me of, and I think I may have shared this in my time with you, but there was a young 19-year-old woman, and she was 3 days out from her wedding. And then her younger sister ran off with her fiancé. Now, how would you experience that? Well, she experienced it with her feet stapled to the ground in absolute pain and hurt and humiliation. And then over the next 50 years, the sister who ran off with her fiancé tried to reconcile, kept coming back over 50 years. And each time she came back, the one who had been hurt and humiliated, left standing at the altar, as it were, she refused to extend forgiveness. Instead, she just exhibited bitterness. And initially, it was her choice. But gradually, she solidified in her bitterness. And at the end, she could not choose otherwise, but her bitterness became her nature. And she ended up with a damaged soul. So, friends, is there anyone here this morning and you're deep in grief? From my heart, I say, don't settle in your sadness. Don't get stuck in your suffering. You must seek personal transformation. You must seek personal transformation. You know, when my wife Ruby, and I've shared this story, when she lost her little one when we were living in the slums of Manila, I'll never forget that after the funeral, one of the people in the slum, they said to Ruby, my wife, "Oh, you come and see Joel. He's the same age as your Joseph would have been if he had lived." Would we say that in New Zealand? But the Filipino knew what they were doing, because what they were trying to do with Ruby was that they were saying to her, Ruby, you need to walk towards your pain. Because if you can walk towards your pain, then you will change. There will be personal transformation. Because what Ruby could see is that she couldn't change the situation. Our Joseph had died, but she could allow the situation to change her. And she did. And she emerged this beautiful person. She let God in. She let grace in. And if you read that passage out of Paul, his life was becoming unstitched. It was dismantling. And he was hearing voices within. But he let God in. He let grace in. And he could write another story with his life. I want to now say a word to us all, and I'm nearly done. I want to say a word to us all here. Choose to get involved in someone else's grief. I guarantee there are people in your worlds where one of them is just, there's grief. And what I want to say to you is make room in your life for broken people. You see, when I was thinking about what I should speak here at GCC, if I could, I'd take you to the bridge where I kind of felt something strong. I was driving over this bridge where we live, the Wanganui River, and I said to the Lord, Lord, what is it that I need to say to GCC? What is the word? And I got this impression, and the impression was kindness. Kindness. Make room in your life for broken people and be kind. Be kind. Kindness also has 1,000 faces. It does. And it could be baking a cake, and it could be making a meal, and it could be babysitting, and it could be mowing someone's lawns. It could be doing all of those things. But Paul is saying in that passage that I read out that kindness is deeper, it's more profound, it's more costly than baking a cake for someone who is in grief. Because the word comfort, when Paul says comfort another, the word comfort in Greek, it carries the idea of allowing someone to get near you. In other words, kindness is about meeting people where they are. Kindness is about getting right up close with other people, getting to know them and their situation. Look, listen, people, on March 15 in Christchurch, Brenton Tarrant from Grafton, New South Wales, whose father committed suicide when he was aged 10. He did a despicable, evil act, as we all know, in going into those two mosques. After that time, there was the churches in Christchurch where their people rang up their leaders and said, what can we do? And there was this one big church in Christchurch, as big as this church, and there was one of their social service director pastor types, and he was being forever rung up by his people, understandably, saying, you know, can we bake a cake? Can we mow the lawns? Can we do this? Can we do that? And after countless phone calls like this, he came to the realization that not one of these well-meaning Christians had said, how can I get to know a Muslim person? Or bake a cake. But not one said, how can I get to know? How can I get up close? How can I get near? Not one said that. That's kindness, to get up close. Now, if you do get up close with people who are grieving, what are some of the mistakes we can make? Eh? Who's made mistakes in this front? What advice would you give to someone else and they are trying to get up close with someone who's grieving? What advice would you give them? I mean, what are some of the mistakes we can make? Quickly, with the person next to you, go to it. Sorry. 2 minutes. Okay, friends, So I'd like to finish in this final minute with a bit of Mickey wisdom. I don't know what you came up with. I have 3 little bits of wisdom I would like to give to you. If you do get up close with someone who is grieving, number 1, never take sides. And you think, what do you mean by that? You know, when I flew out from Wanganui yesterday, I was in a queue boarding the plane, and these 2 women behind me, they didn't know each other, but they started to tell each other about these awful men that they've had in their lives. And one said that, you know, he was a control freak, so after 21 years, you know, she bailed. And the other one said, well, mine had an affair. So, you know, and, you know, understandably, at the time of their separations, it would have been hard for those 2 women. And if we got involved in their lives, it would have been so tempting to take sides. Oh, yeah, he is terrible. Men are useless, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But I tell you, when you take sides, it doesn't help anybody. Jesus is for both. He's for victim, he's for perpetrator. He's for Muslim, he's for tyrant. That is the radical gospel. And I do hope that in the prison that he so rightly deserves, that he discovers a Redeemer. I'm praying for that. But don't take sides. Secondly, don't go with a lot of words. Am I right? People who get alongside people who are grieving, we speak too much. And we give so much advice. I want to say this. Don't give any advice unless you're asked. Can we have a big amen on that one? Yeah, thank you. And thirdly, it goes like this. Be prepared for the person who is grieving to dump. They will dump on you. They will speak out of their terrible plight. They will be angry. They'll be upset. They'll have a go at you at times. When they dump on you, don't dump back. The cardinal rule, the bit of wisdom is this: find someone else in your life where you can dump away. In other words, if they, look, we've just had Ruby's mum come up to Whanganui because she's got creeping dementia. I asked Ruby if I could just share this. And you know, she dumps on Ruby. And the other day she said to Ruby, I'm scared of you. I understood. But she said, I'm scared of you. And she said it in a mean way. In other words, she dumped on Ruby. Now, Ruby has learnt, don't dump back. You dump away. So who'd she dump to? She dumped away. People, pre-winter message. Be kind. Be kind. GCC, be kind. Amen.